My name is Ben Ryan. I run a farm at Deep Creek at south of Adelaide, in the Fleurieu Peninsula. We run about 760 hectares, of which 160 is scrub or swamps or stuff that we manage quite differently than most of the grazing land. And our grazing business is based around sheep and cattle. It started with my own health. Having suffered from depression for a long time, and that got me into some alternative therapies, and that led me into understanding more about food, and then some other education that we did got me to believe that there were ways of farming without using chemicals and artificial fertilisers. And so it was a very progressive thing. It happened over maybe 20 or 30 years of not wanting to use what we've described as normal farming practices, and I had a belief deep down that we could do it without the modern technology, if you like, of chemicals and fertilisers. But I didn't know what that meant. But it was my journey through healing that helped me to understand, and the people that I met on that journey really got me to where I am now. Well, we have a drought every year, and that's something that we can rely on. So every summer is dry. It's cool. It's a very mild climate, so we don't get particularly hot, but we don't get cold. We don't have severe frosts. But the winters can be very wet and very overcast, and I think the lack of sunlight is probably one of our greatest issues. So that affects photosynthesis, obviously, and that grows grass. So it's really important that we have as much grass available during the growing season as possible, so we can harvest that sunlight. The change happens progressively. You change one thing and that opens your mind to the next opportunity, which then opens your mind to 2 opportunities, which opens your mind to 4 opportunities. But you don't know what you don't know until you start knowing stuff. And we thought we were pretty good at what we did, but we were reliant on solving our problems from a drum. And that's just not something that I thought was very smart for the long term. Sure, it works in the short term, and it gets you out of a problem, and probably it helps to produce a lot of stuff, but it really doesn't work in the long term. And so what we're trying to do is do stuff that hopefully makes sense on a holistic approach. So it makes sense for our environment, it makes sense for our health, it makes sense for our animals, but hopefully we can make it make sense for the community. We have made some changes. We have created a system that doesn't rely on solving problems from a drum. We have animals that are much more resilient than they were. We have a landscape that's much more capable of using the sun, which comes to us every day, and the rain, which comes to us. Probably one of the first things that we achieved was not having to drench our sheep. So we were relying on drenching sheep 2 or 3 times a year. We were constantly monitoring for worm burdens, and we've been able to transition out of that to not worrying about whether the sheep have got worms. We actually don't even bother to monitor them anymore. The actual worms, we monitor the sheep's health, but we don't worry about whether they got worms or not. Worms are part of the landscape, and they should be. If the animals haven't got worms in them, there's probably something wrong. So that was a really nice thing to achieve, and it's something I don't have to lie awake at night in the spring thinking, oh God, the lambs are going to start losing weight tomorrow because they got worms. It doesn't really happen anymore. And the other one was not worrying about thistles. So we used to spray probably 1/3 of the farm every year for thistles and cockchafers. Well, we haven't done that for years now, and we've got less thistles and we've got less cockchafers than we've ever had. And so it's amazing when you stop killing stuff, how it stops worrying you. Now we've got a long way to go, but yeah, we have made some changes that I think are really positive. The other thing that we're really passionate about is growing food that is genuinely good for people. So modern agriculture is incredibly good at producing bulk commodities. We produce heaps of it, but it's not necessarily good for you. And so our passion is about trying to understand what that means and how to produce food that makes you healthy, keeps you healthy. I get a little bit aggravated when we have this debate about right to farm. I don't think anybody has a right to farm, but I do think that our community has a right to good quality, healthy food. So if our community starts that conversation saying, look, we're not going to put up with this broadacre production anymore. What we want is highly nutritious food, then there will be a right to farm. And you get it because it'll be valued. So the people in that industry will be valued. But it's got to come from the consumers, and the consumers have to understand what it means. And then as producers, we have to understand what it means to produce high quality food. I think we underestimate the future. You know, we're here for such on a terrestrial base. I don't know what the term is, but you know, the place has been here an awful long time, and we've been here in Australia for a couple of 100 years. We made enormous changes in that time. But even if you think in a 200-year time span, because that's something that's probably tangible for us, I believe we should be operating our system so that in 200 years' time we can look back and say, gee, they were good decisions we made in year 2019. But I think at the moment we'll look back much like we could look back 30 or 40 years and perhaps question some of the decisions we made. So why do we continually bombard ourselves with these technologies that are going to solve all our problems before we really understand what the true effect of them are? So if we make decisions now that we think are appropriate in 10, 20, 100, 200 years' time, perhaps they're better decisions than the ones that are going to solve their problems for the next 6 months or 12 months.